This is Platemark. My name is Anne Schaefer, and I am your host. You have reached us at Series 3 of Platemark, in which I'm interviewing people who occupy various roles in the print ecosystem. That includes artists and curators and gallerists and all sorts of people. But some of my favorite people to talk to are the printers, the collaborative printers. Today's guest is one such person, Mae Shore, who runs Shore Publishing in Tuxedo Park, New York. She has had a really interesting career. She spent 10 years working at Pace Editions with Ruth Lingen and crew, that storied crew that worked with Dine and Close and all of those guys. And she's got some great stories about that. And she also has great stories about growing up in SOHO in the 1970s and partnering with her life partner, Brad Ewing, on new editions coming up. We talk about print fairs and the importance of the new Brooklyn Fine Art Print Fair that has just occurred as I am publishing this episode, and just how important it is to the ecosystem to have places for younger emerging print shops and publishers to show their work. Let's see, housekeeping. I identify as a cishet white woman and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Images we talk about are over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. Over there, you can also hit support and donate. Help me keep the lights on. All right, let's get rolling. Mae, it's so great to see you. Thank you for coming on Platemark today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Before we get too far, can you introduce yourself for everybody?
My name is Mae Shore, and I am the owner-printer of Shore Publishing, which is in Tuxedo Park, New York, which is about an hour northwest of New York City.
Cool. You know, I love to talk to the printers, so I just keep stacking them up. But you also have this is the thing I wanted to get to right away, which is that you managed to start not only the print and publishing end shop, but also a gallery, and you have them next door to each other. And I feel like there must be a story behind how you got to sort of leap. It feels like a leap of faith, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Really just so bold. What was the sequence?
I opened the gallery in 2011, and it was actually a way to sell things. So I had been printing work, and had some outlets to sell work, but I had been in New York for over a decade. And the gallery is in Tuxedo. And my son at that point we were looking at middle school. And so it seemed like a good time to maybe make the transition out of the city. Tuxedo was close to New York, but it's also pretty isolated. I got a space and opened up the gallery. And then a couple years after that, the space next door to the gallery became available. And I decided that I wanted to open up the publishing end of it, bring the print shop back kind of into the fold, into the mix. So at first, the first couple of shows that I did were really print heavy. And actually they kind of have been throughout the whole history of the gallery. The print shop just celebrated 10 years, which I kind of can't believe it. And I opened in 2011. The gallery was on one side of the studio, and actually another little space became available in this building that I'm in Tuxedo Square. And I moved the gallery to the other side of the print shop. So it's actually a smaller space. The work between the two spaces the shows in the gallery, there was a lot of freedom to kind of show different types of work. So I could show sculpture and photography. I showed a lot of painters and a lot of printmakers, of course. And the print shop also had its own kind of program that it was doing. But I've really focused over the last couple of years, I think, it's really about kind of balancing both. So how do you balance setting up all these shows in the gallery? And I have 8-week exhibitions and then having all the artists come into the print shop and make editions. And I started to feel like I wanted to focus more on the publishing part of it, the print shop. And so the gallery is still happening, but it's sort of a different, it's sort of it's changing, I guess I could say. Yeah.
Does it feel like it's becoming a showroom for the publishing arm?
I definitely want it to be. Yes. Yeah. That's part of what I feel like that we're going to do. But it's also really great to have artists come in and curate shows. I mean, I do love that part of it. And we're a small community here in Tuxedo, so it's nice to have openings. And because the print shop and the gallery are connected, people love to come in and, they come into the print shop and they can see what's happening in there. And I've always liked that model of having the studio and a little gallery next to it to show the work. Yeah, it's evolving. I guess all the time we're trying to assess, At one point I thought maybe I wouldn't do the gallery anymore, but I realized it actually is really valuable. So it does provide really good things. So
yeah, there's a lot of shops that have a small gallery that they can show their works in, like tandem or flatbed or any number of them. But I think, it's important to have somewhere where you can spread the work out, really. And if it happens to be on a wall, great.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's nice to be able to pull back the curtain, in a way, and in the moment be able to pull things from a flat file or show blocks or show, states, or everything is right there at your fingertips. So, and I'm sure, as I mean, so much of printmaking and showing prints is really showing people what the process is and educating people about what the different mediums are and what the processes look like. So to be able to pull out a woodcut when you're showing someone a woodcut and you have all the blocks right there, it's a really nice thing.
Right, especially if you have multiple blocks and layers and things, right? I've talked to a lot of people now on the pod, and sometimes I'll get somebody who says, and I agree with them to a point, that by focusing on the technical aspects, we are stuck in a rut, kind of, that the printmakers are always in this corner huddling about how did you do that?
Mm-hmm.
How did you get that effect? And sometimes that can put the content and the visual second, but that's like the fun part of it. So it's kind of this it's so hard because you've got this little club over here in the corner going, oh my God, how'd you do that? Versus like, we need to, kind of put that part aside sometimes and pretend that we're like painting and sculpture and
right.
What you see is what you get, right?
Yeah. I know, it's true. And I think there is a part that we all kind of do love about that process, but there's process in everything, right? So, people love to go to painter studios or go to a photography studio. They love to see how the work is. I think if someone is interested in the artist, then they like to see how the work is made. But I think that's the difference between having a gallery where you're just presenting the work on the wall and it's a show of that artist's work. And you don't have to get into every little, especially in printmaking, every little type of minutia of what medium it is. But there is that part of it if people are interested and they do want to learn more. Sometimes people, they're happy to just look at it and, they can admire it as an image and as a piece of art, but they don't necessarily want to understand what a printing press is. The only thing, though, I'm sort of a stickler for is that they're not reproductions, and I'm sure you've talked to people about that, it's not a reproduction of another artwork. It's an original in a multiple form. So the image only exists in that medium. And that's something that I really try to express to basically everybody,
We're all cheerleaders, right? In our home corner.
We're all trying to kind of that part is really important, that you're not taking something and just reproducing it.
Yeah. And I do think that showing people the process helps them conceive of this, that it isn't, I'm pushing print on my printer thing. Like there's a lot of craft and a lot of hard work and decision-making and that's involved in it. So, yeah.
And that projects can go on for years sometimes. I mean, and that the artist has invested an incredible amount of time. The printer, the publisher has invested an incredible amount of time and materials and labor to make this piece exist. It is kind of unique in that way, in that with print making, for the most part, artists go to a print shop to collaborate with a print shop where they have material, they have equipment, presses, or whatever it is that's there that they don't normally have. So you do need some equipment. I mean, unless you're doing woodcuts that you're rubbing with a spoon, which anyone can do, and which I do here too. I mean, my operation is it's pretty low tech in a way because I'm a relief print shop primarily. So I have an etching press, but I don't have acids or materials to process or make plates. So almost everything I do here is we carve wood blocks, we carve lino blocks, collograph, poussoir, but I can print pretty much anything on the press behind me. But I don't have those types of facilities. And I feel like most studios are pretty specific, whether they're a litho shop or an etching studio. So we know enough of those printers. If someone wants to do an etching, they can make a plate, anywhere really. And then if I can print it here, but yeah. Right. So it's a pretty low-fi operation, I'd say, in terms of printmaking.
And that was intentional.
It was intentional because it was what I do. Yeah, it's what I was never an etching printer. So it didn't make sense for me to try to all of a sudden start making etchings when there are printers who make really good, beautiful etchings. So I kind of stuck with what I'm, good at. I'm a relief printer. I actually did a lot of lithography when I was much younger, but I kind of fell out of it because, stones, right? Then you have to have a library of stones and you're moving stones. So I really love relief and I really love woodcut. Yeah. It's a very direct way of working for, an artist.
When I go to your booth at a fair, any fair, pick a fair, I feel like I am less aware of the fact that it's all relief. Sometimes you have other things, obviously, but like it's the way you do it is really remarkable because sometimes I'm like, wait, what is that? And it's a relief print, but it's printed in such a way that it looks delicate, where I don't think of relief as delicate, like you've really got this deft touch, which is really remarkable in my book.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I try to really push the medium in a way that maybe isn't as common. We did these prints with Amy Bennett. She's a painter, but the prints are lino cuts. We're using a lot of, and the images are small. They're only, this big, but we're using about 25 little teeny blocks, so they almost start to have this transparent layer, almost like little watercolors or something. So I think that's something I'm really interested in, is taking one medium and really playing around at the edges of what it can do. Because we all know woodcut, we all know black ink on white paper, and I love it. We all know, but it's fun to dance around the other parts of what those things can do. And maybe they're kind of unexpected.
Well, I would say, because the Amy Bennett's are small. They're sort of 5 by 8, if not even.
Yeah, I think the little image was like it was like 3.5 by 5 inches or something. The littlest one.
But that God help me, they do look like watercolors. They're sort of crazy. But so when you are working with Amy or somebody else, can you walk us through your process for taking her full colored watercolor or whatever her design drawing basis is, and how do you break it up?
Well, she actually did all the chroma work herself. So we're actually working on a third piece. We've done 2, and we're actually working on a third one. And she makes a painting for the project. And then from there, she actually has Mylars in her studio, and she does all the color separations herself. And then I have those separations. I make plates because that's, what I can do. That's what I can contribute. So I carve and make the little plates. And then we go through rounds of, the color is really intense with Amy. So I start with the very painterly way that she is painting these transparencies. And as we go through it, we start to, like a fine-tooth comb, like we kind of pull out the things that we really like, where it gets shapes and colors are overlapping in such an interesting way that probably a printmaker would not create an image this way, but a painter would, and then I'll kind of clean up little areas, maybe in the figures that do need a more graphic sense to them, a more printing kind of sense to read. Then we go back and forth that way, with proofing. And so I'm carving blocks. And then at that point, she's really kind of guiding me, what she wants the finished image to look like. She's painting everything by hand. There's no computers or Photoshop. And that's how I mostly work with artists. Like when James and Katia come in, they're carving their blocks. They're drawing directly on the blocks themselves. and carving. So it's really direct. We don't really make a whole lot of files. It depends. Well, actually, for the Kamrooz Aram project, we had the first studio visit in 2019, and then we actually finished the project in 22, 23. I mean, there was a pandemic in the middle there, but sometimes it really takes a long time for something to come to fruition. And in that case, he really wanted a direct interpretation of the paintings, of the transparencies that he was painting. So we did do those in a photomechanical way. So there wasn't any carving on my end of a plate.
So you scanned his painting, and then what?
He did 9 or 10 films. He hand-painted films with acrylic ink. And then I did scan those from there because he was working on having 9 plates that we could use in kind of a variable composition. So he had all these shapes, these arabesque shapes that would interlock and overlap, or not interlock, but they would fit into each other, And so sometimes the space would be negative and sometimes it would be positive. And then he had a really specific palette that he was working with. And in that case, too, actually, we worked with a Kimmy Martin who made the paper for that project. And that was the first time I had ever done anything like that in this studio, where we had a bunch of meetings with Kamrooz. And because Kamrooz's paintings, he works on this ground. And the ground is a very textured, kind of atmospheric space. It's usually a color, a green or a blue. We wanted to work with that and not just print on paper, just like a Western paper. So Kimmy made these beautiful sheets. They were cotton sheets. And then she actually did a second really thin kind of veiled layer. So the sheet had it's like a 1/4-inch margin of this sage green. And then a very thin veiled color on top of it that you could kind of see through and had texture that was also like a whiter version of that same color. So we had a limited amount of sheets, and that was so beautiful. I mean, that was what a treat to print on that paper.
But you also have to print it square, and you can't tear down the edges.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And you have to register 9 different plates on it with a 4-sided decal sheet. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That was really good. That was fun.
Yeah, those sound great. I think when people learn about printmaking, they learn about the artist is making a thing on a plate, and they're getting the image into the plate or on it or however they're doing it, and then they're printing it. So there's definitely 2 different, moments. And we always talk about, you have to plan and blah, blah. But I think that the amount of work that cumulatively happens before you get to making the plates probably equals as much time as doing the plate making and the printing combined.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, sometimes the conceptual part can take that long. So I think in Kamrooz's case, we were really trying to figure out what conceptually made sense that was of interest to him in printmaking. And then that's when we came up with, he came up with that idea of having these 9 forms that would interplay with each other and that could be, printed. He would come into the studio and we would have all the plates out and all the pieces, paper would be pinned on the wall. And he had his original films. So he would be composing it as we were going, and he would make compositions. And then he would instruct me and I would pull out plate 3 and we had the palette, and plate 3 would be in this green and plate 5 would be in this blue, so we'd print them, we'd hang them all up again, and then he would go through the process again. So we would work, for days like that. It's always great to have an artist in the studio. So it was really nice to see him composing in the moment and then responding to what we had done, and then, or saying, what, that one's done. That one's, no more. We would maybe print 3 or 4 plates on it, and that would be a finished piece.
Would any of the plates be doubled up? A second run of?
No, I don't think so. But the way the forms were made, they would overlap. So you would get all these, secondary and tertiary. We get all these like really nice color mixing. happening. But I don't think we would print the same form in a different color once there was already that space filled in the composition.
I mean, because you could flip the block or something, right?
Yeah, and we talked about that, but he actually designed it to be specific.
Okay.
There was always a top and a bottom. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we talked about that though too, that you could have a form that was then you could do like a jigsaw or something,
Right.
But that's a different project.
Yeah, that's the truth. Yeah, no, those sound really cool. And his composing with these transparencies that he had created immediately brought to mind Hayter, Stanley William Hayter, because he was all about this automatic drawing thing, which doesn't sound exactly the same. But what he would do is draw and draw and draw and draw, and he would kind of categorize the forms into different stacks, and the tallest stack would win, basically. And he would have these forms on a tracing paper sort of thing, and he'd put them up on a window, and he'd overlay things and start building the composition that way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's actually exactly the same. Yeah.
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 Funny.
Yeah, it was really fun, because I would hear, because I'd be printing while he would kind of start to stack them up. So he would make a composition, he would label it, and then that would be way to be on deck, so to speak, and I'd be printing the one we had just done, and then I'd hear him, he's just at the other end of the room, but he would be, putting the next one down, and then he would not want that one, and then he would put the other, film down and figure it out until he got it just the way he wanted it. And then he would say, okay, these two are ready to go, and so I would print those, quickly clean the plate because we'd switch color, register the plate, get everything ready, print it, anything I could do. When we first started out, just a way to start the project was just, we would say, let's just print 4 sheets. Because he didn't want to compose beforehand. He didn't want to, and he could have probably composed in Photoshop, right? And just figured out exactly what he wanted. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to compose very much in the moment. So sometimes just to start the piece, we would print one plate in dark blue, say 3 times, on 3 different new sheets just to start them. It's like an icebreaker or something, And then as we would go, we would, it got more complicated because there was a lot of color changes and cleaning of plates that was happening. So sometimes there would be a stack of plates that needed to be cleaned, and while trying to mix new colors and ink up new plates in a timely manner. And, and you don't want the artist to be sitting around. You don't want, them to be waiting on you, really. So I think it was nice that he was able to keep compositions, and he would just keep notes. So, I'd have a list of what needed to be printed.
It's such an interesting way of working because it's super methodical but playful at the same time.
Yeah, it was really fun. It was really fun to see what he thought was finished and what he, and some of them remained unfinished. Like they would kind of go into the unfinished pile. Like some of them at the end of the day, he would say, this one is finished, this one is finished. And then there was a kind of a third, there was the finish, unfinished, and then I don't know what to do with these ones. So, we'll come back and resolve those or not.
Wow. Do you as the printer look at some things that come across and say, oh, that's exactly what it should be, stop, and he still wants to, do something else? Does that happen?
It's actually funny. I think in this case, it was sort of the reverse. I think he loved some of these really beautiful, elegant forms. And I think as a printer, I kept wanting to add more printing. I was like, we could add some more color to this one. He was absolutely right. And actually, I'm really glad he pulled a number of the ones that he did and left them as is, because he was 100% right. They're actually really, really some of my favorite ones now. So, it's like when you're making them in the moment, you could have a feeling like you want to do something, but when you look back on it, you go, oh, that was 100% the right decision. And I'm so glad, you're like, these ones are done. Don't keep printing on those. Yeah.
So, and these are now unique works. You didn't addition anything.
That's right. They're mono prints. Yeah, they're uniques. Yeah, they were really fun. I've actually never really worked that way before, so that was new for me. And I think it was new for him too, because he had made some etchings before with Jennifer Melby, but this was the first print I think he had done in a long time. It had been, I think, years. So,
Wow.
yeah.
I love to ask printers this, or publishers really. How do you connect with artists that you want to work with? And are you open to people approaching you about, hey, I'd like to do this thing? Or do you have a stack up of people that you'll never get through?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm always curious about that too, because, like how do certain artists go to certain studios and work in that medium? And it's interesting because I could say, like with James and Katia, I had met them when James was doing lino cuts with Ruth at Pace, and he was doing lino reductions. And Katia was working in the etching studio, and I'd always wanted to work with Katia, but she was just working in etching. So when I opened up the print shop, she was the first artist that I asked to come work with me. And she did a lino reduction. This was 2014, called Sailing Alone. And it's still one of my favorite prints. It's 20 by 16, I believe, which was the size of her paintings at the time. And so when they collaborated on the reductions, and we've done 4 total pieces on that, they both knew the reduction process. And actually, Katia had done another reduction lino cut with me before she collaborated with James. So it was something that they were really familiar with. But I think part of it's really organic, like, oh, you should work with this person. Or someone will say, oh, have you looked at this artist's work? They could make great prints. Most of the time, I'm asking people to come in. Sometimes it's a cold call, like I did that with Amy. It was a very cold call. And it just turned out that she lives 45 minutes away from the print shop. So that was really great. I didn't know that. So that worked out really, really nicely. It's sort of, sometimes it feels very intentional, and sometimes it just feels kind of organic. Like I worked with Glenn Goldberg, and I had worked with Glenn also at Pace. So he was an artist that I knew, and I really loved his work. And he had experience in print. Some artists have no experience in printmaking, and some are incredibly experienced printmakers, like James and Katia. Or in the case with the William Villalongo projects that we did, I think he had done, I'm trying to think, I don't think he had even worked, because he did prints in Florida. But I think those came after the ones because we did a woodcut in 2014, like a very multi-plate, multicolor woodcut called Vitruvian's Daughter. Will was an artist that actually had met through Matthew Day Jackson. And I knew Matthew Day Jackson through working at Dudonay. So, I feel like sometimes one thing, they kind of lead into another.
The benefit of working in a variety of shops and then going out on your own as a publisher is that you know that you like that person, or you like the way they work, or you can, say we have some kind of alignment in our thinking or something. And that's, you're sort of trying them on for size.
Yeah. No, it's true. Because working in a print shop with a artist, or artist with a printer, is a pretty tete-a-tete kind of experience. So you wind up spending a lot of time together, and you want it to be interesting and you want it to be fun, and you want it to be, an experience that I hope that the artist finds valuable for what they're doing, in their own studios.
And if your shop is 45 minutes outside the city, you have to, you are really together.
Right, exactly. You were together all day. Yeah. Or in the case of James and Katia, sometimes they would come and stay. But we're close enough that you can come for the day. There's the bus and the train depot that goes to Port Authority and Penn Station are right across the street from me. So the access, at least with that, is good. And a lot of people have cars. So yeah, it's a nice day trip. It's funny, when I first was here, I was wondering, I'm like, God, I feel so far removed from New York. It was interesting because it seemed like people, my friend, they like to get out of the city, and it was a nice excuse a day trip, so October is always really great, or summer is really nice to be here. I don't know if you can see, but behind me is Harriman State Park. So It's just some mountains behind me. So that was actually, I felt really removed in a way, but then also it's actually not that far ultimately.
Well, yeah, and you're a destination now. But you grew up in New York City, which we talked about for a second before we started rolling. And I spent a little time in New York, but I did not grow up in SOHO.
Yeah. I was there mid 70s. I was, a little kid, but I went to school there through high school, moved, from SOHO. We were on Prince and West Broadway, and a lot of galleries, a lot of artists. It's sort of my first experience with any artist. A childhood friend, her dad was an artist. And I remember going to their loft, and I just thought it was like the coolest thing. I just thought it was how cool that, you can live in this big space, and it was like a live workspace. And then in 81 or 82, we moved down to Tribeca. We were on Chambers and West Broadway. So we were still on West Broadway. It was all parking lots and light manufacturing, and, the World Trade Center was there. I, grew up basically in the shadow of the World Trade Center. New York was a really interesting, it was gritty. It was very, very gritty. Yeah, very gritty. I loved it. I always loved New York. I always loved New York. Yeah, so I lived there, and then, I lived out in Portland, Oregon for a while. I was out there in the 90s. And it was actually where I got my first printing gig. I was working, I had a day job. I was working in a screen printing shop, and I was doing quality. It was like a textile screen printing shop, and I was doing quality control and finding pinholes, and I was shipping and, kind of doing all like working the end of the dryer, that kind of thing. And then I eventually wound up just mixing all the inks for the jobs. That was actually a skill that I keep with me because, if the job only called for 12 pieces and the area is this big, you mix a little teeny bit of blue, whatever you don't mix a lot of ink. Or if we're doing 2,000 and you have a big area, you're mixing gallons of ink. And actually, it used to be kind of a running joke with me and Ruth that if she would just randomly call out a Pantone number, I would tell her what color it was. she would quiz me,
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
But how do you figure out, like, when you're mixing a color and it's not quite, on the magenta end of pink, it's on the bubblegum end of pink, like, how do you know what the heck you're doing?
Right. Well, and each inks have their own characteristics, but that I actually was able to learn a lot about that, and I was mixing ink by weight. So everything was done in grams. So the white had a certain weight to it, and Pantone figured it all out. So I was just, following those guides. But yeah, that was...
I don't believe you.
I had lots of inks, but, you could mix all the process colors by weight, and that would get exactly the formula that you wanted.
Oh my
So
God.
instead of parts, they were doing it by weight.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't even know if they do that system anymore, actually, but because, Pantone evolves. I think they do percentages now, but I met a printer named Mark Mahaffey when I was in Portland. And so I was doing the ink mixing, during the week. And Mark had a really nice lithography shop in Northwest Portland. And he had a Victorian house, and the parlor was the print shop, and the basement was the letterpress shop. And then they lived upstairs. And he brought me in as an apprentice, intern. I was filing plates, and it was the first time I realized that you could be a printer. He had worked at Gemini before he opened up his own studio. And when you walked in the house, there was a straight shot staircase to the second floor. And he had a Richard Serra Icelandic print, one of the Icelandic series. And I just remember seeing that piece and being completely blown away. I had never seen prints of that scale, and I didn't even know that was possible. And so it sort of dawned on me that this was actually something that you could do. You could be a collaborative printer and a publisher. And it was through Mark. So Gordon Gilkey, who was the curator of prints at the Portland Art Museum at that time, he had, I guess, the granddaughter of an engraver, Chas B. Hall, had given him 20 of these presidential engravings from the turn of the century. And they were beautiful. And so that was my first printmaking gig, really, was printing these engravings for the Gilkey collection. And the family got a set. And I had never seen plates like that. I mean, plates are like instruments, it's like they're beautiful in their own right. And these were copper engravings. And I actually didn't know this until I printed them. They're actually very straightforward, because I am not an etching printer, but they're very straightforward to print. The grooves are nice and deep, and they hold the ink really beautifully. And that was such a cool experience for me. And I think that's when I really sort of figured I think I'm going to be a printmaker. Yeah.
So it didn't happen in school?
No, it did. But I mean, it happened in school, but the idea that you could be a professional collaborative printmaker and work with artists, that's when I understood what that actually was. Yeah.
I didn't know anything about it until I don't even know when, honestly. I think if I had been in your shoes, I would have been right with you. I would have been like, yes, I'm going to do this thing.
Yeah, because it's not something that I didn't really understand what it was. And Mark really showed me. He was publishing and working with local artists, like Northwest artists. And Portland had a really nice printmaking community. And Gordon Gilkey, he actually, that was 97, I think, when I was there printing. And I think he died in 2000. So I feel really lucky to have just been able to have met him. It's interesting when you realize that that's something that you can do. Because he would regale me with these great stories of, Gemini and working there and the artists that were coming in the 80s. And, and of course, you're like, that sounds amazing. How interesting. And, you're not the artist, you're kind of the technician, you're kind of the mechanic of the artist, of the art, part of that making. And I always thought that was really fun too.
Well, so how did you end up working at Pace, which is no slouch of a print shop itself?
The summer of 99, I was living in Portland and I wound up moving back to New York. And I had the good fortune of being introduced to Ruth, and their print shop had just moved. So the Spring Street Workshop had just moved to 18th Street, and maybe they moved the year before. And they were having a party to celebrate the new space. So they had, the archive, the warehouse, the print shop. Ruth, said, come join us, come, you can just kind of meet everybody. And again, I was very, very, it was where I knew it was where I wanted to be. I loved it. I just loved the print shop, and I got to meet some of the printers and being around all that work. It was just, I was really happy, to be there. And Ruth was doing a paper piece with Chuck Close that summer. She was working out of Dudonay because Pace Prints didn't have a paper mill at that point. She needed some help on it. And so she was doing, actually it was the small self-portrait. I think it was the 2000 one. We did two, a smaller one and a larger one. The larger one was 60 by 40, which came out, I believe, in 2001, because that was the summer of 2001. And this would have been probably the summer of 2000 was the smaller one. And the paper piece was based on the states from the lino reduction, the self-portrait lino that he had done a few years prior. And so she needed a hand. And I was like, I'll be your hand, I'll help. And I didn't have paper making experience particularly, but it's sort of one of those things where I think it's really more about temperament. I think printmakers, we kind of have this same temperament where if you can figure out one process, you could probably do another process. But I wound up, I was there, I helped on that project, and then I wound up getting hired there. I was there for over a decade. and Jim Dine was there, and Chuck Close, of course. And yeah, there were so many amazing artists. Alan Shields, was working in the studio at that time, and that was a really amazing. He was such an amazing artist. And that studio is really two studios. They're one studio, but it's a etching studio and a relief studio. And so that's sort of how I wound up falling into relief, because Ruth is a relief printer, and I was really working with Ruth for years. We would work on projects together, but a lot of paper making too. So a project would happen that needed paper. Sometimes it would just be a paper element, or it'd be a full paper piece. And it was really fun because we got to go down to Dieudonné and do residencies when Dieudonné was on Broome Street. So we'd kind of disappear down there for a few months. And yeah, it was a really nice time. Those early 2000s were a really nice time in New York. It was like the .com bubble in a way. So there seemed to be this openness to make projects that I don't know, maybe they wouldn't be made at this point, just because of the cost of them. A lot of fun experimental kind of stuff.
Right. There did seem to be a honeymoon in there somewhere.
Yeah, there really was. And maybe we're in one again now, too. I don't know. You don't really know until you're kind of through it, and 2008 happens and you realize. But there definitely was. Those early 2000s were really a nice time to be in New York, too. New York was a nice time. Jim Dine was working in the print shop at that time with his printer angels, Ruth, Julia, and Kathy. And he was such a master and so inspiring. He's still he's one of my heroes, my printmaking heroes. He would come in the morning and he'd have all these wood blocks. He'd say, print this one in red and print this in green and print. Like I had never worked at that speed before, where you're really, and Ruth likes to time things anyway, but but where you're really working quickly. And he's like, I'll be back at lunch, and I want to see all these pieces. And when he would sign, usually when you sign with an artist, you're moving a print in front of them and then it goes into the signed. We would just have a stack of prints and we would just lift the corner and he would just drop one and sign and drop one and sign and drop one, because he would sign so fast. You couldn't move the prints fast enough.
Oh my God.
And I remember one time as printer, we would have these little printer notes, on the editions to be signed. And one time I had written light one on top, and it was a Venus edition. And so if it was a light one, you could maybe show him and he would say, no, it's not, tear it up or something. Or maybe it could be a proof or something. And the piece wound up it was titled Light One on Top. So that just became the title of the piece because the printer's notes were there.
That's so Jim.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
It's like that one's light one on top.
Oh my God. Yeah, he's funny. I've talked to Ruth and Julia and you and Bill Hall, all of whom have printed for Jim. And I don't know what it is about the shop, but you guys seem to have sort of a magical thing going on there. Everybody seemed to get along and you're all dependent on each other. I don't know. It just seemed really great.
It really was. It was a really nice period. Yeah. When Ruth and Julia, and it was such a nice time. Ruth is one of the most fun printers to work with, period. And I'm sure everyone will say that. She's so fun. It was pretty small, and then we got bigger, and then I think now it's actually even really small again. So, sometimes the printers, there's more printers and less printers, but it was a really nice time. Those early 2000s, yeah, they were a really fun time where I felt like there was a lot of freedom to really kind of go out on a limb and combine a lot of different mediums for artists. So you would do etching, would do part of the print, and then we'd get it, and then we would do woodcut and relief on it. And yeah, sometimes there were paper elements added to that. Jane Hammond was doing really interesting pieces there was a little bit of digital too that was starting at that time, and up to that point there was no digital, but it was collaging, and she was doing these shaped televisions that were really great that were really unique. So I felt like Kiki Smith was doing folded she was taking those etchings and folding them, and there was a lot of really interesting things happening, at the time. And Yasu started there, and so he was working in Japanese woodcut, and that was a whole new process. And sometimes, he primarily would be working by himself, but sometimes he would come out and see what we were doing, and it must have been like, what is going on? It's like collaging and dry mounting and, big prints that we're hand printing for Jim because there's no press that's big enough to print them. So we spent a lot of time hand printing big oversized woodcuts.
Oh my God. Oh Lord.
Yeah.
So you have published some things with Yasu.
I've shown a lot of Yasu's work.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Yasu, we've done 2 shows in the gallery of his work. So he's the printer and the publisher. And
okay.
And I've shown his work at fairs, and so I'm a big fan, of what he's doing and his work. And he's doing more collage work now.
Oh.
Yeah.
I haven't seen those.
Yep.
I was just like, the shapes, they're so precise, but they waft into nothingness, and these colors meet and kiss. And I'm like, how in the world do you do that?
He's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
The master. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I don't know if he'd be willing to talk to me. I have a feeling he's shy, but.
Oh, he would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. He would be really great. I mean, the first project that he was working on when I was there was Emma. It was Akachan. Emma was a Chuck Close. It was the ukiyo-e woodcut that was the largest one that he had ever made, I think, or ever. It was a huge piece, and it took him years. And he formed a room out of basically shower curtains just to control the humidity, so we carved out a space in the relief area, and that was a really intense project because he was hand printing. I think he was doing some press printing. Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing that's funny is that, an artist will make a painting or they'll make a drawing or they'll do something, and then they work on it for however, like a month or whatever their time frame is for it. But then the printers, we often look at it for months and months and months, and we're analyzing it and we're breaking it all apart and we're rebuilding it. Like we probably spent more time with some of these pieces than the artists have. They've made them, and then they've kind of moved on, and we're going, okay, wait, how do we do that again? How are we going to build this thing back together again? And so, yeah, it's sort of I think that's the temperament part, is that you have to enjoy doing those little, it's sort of like these very detailed little things, Actually, I remember listening to your interview with Peter Pengill, and he said that he liked standing at the inking stand with the plates. He liked doing that all day. Like that was a fun thing for him. And I think probably a lot of printers can kind of relate to that part of it. Yeah. Maybe some printers more like working with the artist part of it, and some printers more like wiping the plates, and that division of labor sometimes is there. But yeah, I think there's that sort of, you kind of like those quiet moments. Right.
I mean, there's definitely a difference between the editioning printer and the collaborative printer.
And the publisher, so it's like when you're publishing, you're trying to figure out that's a different kind of hat, right? You're going, okay, how are we going to sell this? And then there's the collaborating printer with the artist, where that's actually the really fun part. Although I think, for me personally, I enjoy all aspects of it. I do like the kind of quiet time at the inking stand with the plates too. But yeah, it's a very different kind of mode, and you have to give yourself over to whatever that mode is. So once you've decided that you want to work with an artist, and then you have to give yourself over to what they want to do too, but so if they really want to try something and it's going to cost a certain amount, and you just have to kind of go with it because you want that part of it to have its own space to grow.
Yeah, That's a factor I hadn't really thought of. In my mind, you would budget the project, and the ink would be this, and the paper would be that, and then I don't think I'd ever factored in, let's try this, and off you go into another realm of cost.
Yeah. Well, that for the publishing, that's there. For contract printing, it's much more straight and narrow. So yeah,
Right.
you figure it out all beforehand. Yeah, the budget is pretty fixed. And if an artist really wants to change something, then you have to go back to the publisher and adjust the estimate. But as the publisher, you have a little more freedom to talk it out. Often it's time, it's not always necessarily big expenses in materials but it's just really the labor and the time.
Right. Right. Of course, that makes sense. You wear a lot of hats, is really what I'm trying to say. I mean,
Yeah.
you're the curator, and that's a lot of different kinds of thinking, not to mention the business end.
Yeah. And sometimes I feel like you have to compartmentalize them a little bit just to give yourself the freedom to do what you need to do in that moment. And some projects are successful and some aren't. And I don't think I love or don't love any of them any differently. It's really about creating things that you're really proud of and you're happy that they exist.
As we're recording this, it's right before the holidays. So, and I don't know that I'll get this up before the print fair, but you're showing at the IFPDA fair, of which you're a member now, right?
Yes, became a member last year.
Yeah. Oh, nice. What are you bringing?
I just did a project, and actually, so Brad and I co-published a project with Asher Lifton, and we've actually done 4 editions with him. He's a painter, like a sort of a photorealistic painter, but he works in CMYK in his paintings, and he also does
Whoa.
So
How does that work? I can't
he's he's painting in CMYK in layers, just like Prince.
What? Oh, that's wild.
Yeah. And then he's also does color pencil drawings.
Okay.
So we just did a little piece. It's a portrait. And it's a small print, but it's actually a screen print and a relief print. We're kind of doing a little co-publishing stuff. This was actually co-published with Nino Meyer. And then showing some of other Asher's pieces for context. He did these 2 window prints that we printed that I also really love. Amy Bennett's 3rd print, which we're hopefully getting close. We're in the throes of it. And then some of my favorites and I have just a couple Kamrooz Aram pieces left. So I'm going to bring those. And then we have some other stuff. I don't think it's going to be ready for the fair though, because it has to go to the framers. So there's some projects that are up and coming, but
when you go to the fair, people kind of nudge me with their elbow and go, and that one's still wet in that frame.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It definitely happens. You put a lot of dry. You've got to put some dryer in the ink, though.
But so you mentioned Brad, who we haven't talked about, and he's your partner, your life partner.
Yes.
And he has his own publishing arm, which he does separately and not in your space. But now you're collaborating with him. That's great.
Yeah. He's a screen printer and a letterpress printer. And yeah, he works out of Grenfell Press, which is on 29th and 6th. He actually is doing all this. He has his own publishing. He does his own contract work. I have my other own contract work. I have my publishing. And then we're also collaborating. So we're also publishing together. I think we're actually going to start a project soon with an artist. And just he and I are going to publish her. And then we collaborate a lot actually on some of the contract printing. So we've done a number of projects in the past few years. A Mickalene Thomas project. I guess the Matt Jackson one I did by myself. We've done 4 projects together. Christina de Miguel, the Susumu, Ibicho, that was for Zwerner. It's nice to, sometimes 2 heads is better than 1, especially when you're working with an artist that you don't know and you've just kind of met. And so you're trying to think of how's the quickest way we can get to the printmaking part of it.
So are you going to combine a new name for the collaborative publishing arm of Marginal and
Shore?
I
know we talk about it. Yeah, I know. Like, should we just finally merge these 2 entities?
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't really quite figure it out what to do. because we both also have our own things that we like to do too. So it's a good question. It's definitely a good question. Are we like marginal shore editions or something?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like you twisted it for the gallery name, Mae Shore, Shea Moore. I thought that was brilliant.
Oh, you got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Wait, people don't get it, really?
No, people actually sometimes they ask me, where did you come up with that name? So that's
All right, people, get it? Yeah. Mae Shore, Shea Moore, get it?
Yeah, get it? Yeah, totally. That's very funny. That's good. Well, cool. I'm glad you got that. That was a name that I came up with when I was really little, and I liked to sign drawings. And I thought you had to be French to be an artist because all I knew was like, French, Matisse, and so I was like, yep, Shea Moore. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so we need some sort of marginal, shore margin. I don't know. Yeah.
Sarge, yeah. Something. Look
if you come up with something good, let me know.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have a little contest online.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Well, is there anything that you want to tell us that we haven't gotten to yet?
Nothing that comes offhand. It's just sort of fun to relive some of the good times, and
yeah.
I mean, I think printmaking it seems like it's a really strong thing that's happening, and people are interested in printmaking, and it's really, I'm glad.
Yeah, I think if we can all keep yelling in the wind, then maybe somebody will hear us.
Yeah, I think people are hearing,
I think so. I mean, artists have, for so many, 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 many years, partook of all of these different techniques, prints, drawings, photographs, like in a way to have something that comes to you as you're working in one, bounce off into the next one. And I think printmaking has been instrumental in helping artists think for so long that I just want it to be second nature that they say, oh, let me go make a print with Mae,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing, is really trying to, encourage artists to try printmaking. You never know. I mean, you just never know. And some artists are really open to it, and some are a little more hesitant. But I find once they actually start experimenting in printmaking, it becomes fun. I think it should be a fun thing.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing I always talked about with the art viewing public. Like, if I can get you over that little speed bump of technical understanding, you're in, right? It's the same with artists. Just got to get them over the bump.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And it's just, I think for a lot of artists, it's time, or, maybe it's just trying to manage what they think is time away from the studio, but it actually all kind of comes around, I think. I hope,
Right.
I hope. Right. And with a lot of artists, I find that it does, that they really enjoy. I've noticed that it's a good time to work with an artist after a show, because they've thought about that body of work, and now they're ready to try something. It's like starting fresh again and thinking about the next thing, and so it's a way to experiment a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like it. Thanks for coming on Platemark. I love talking. I mean, I like talking to artists, of course, because they're the center of the whole project, but I love talking to the printers because you guys have seen so much and thought through so many things, and it's just, I don't know, you have such great stories.
Yeah, well, thank you. I will see you in Brooklyn.
You're going to come check us out?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's come together. I think I just filled my last booth, and the Powerhouse people have, it's a pretty big team, and they are excited. So they are throwing all of their energy and resources at it. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's so exciting to have a fair back in New York that, that's taking the place of EAB, because EAB was such an important print fair, and I know we all miss it. So thank you. I mean, the Brooklyn Print Fair is really it's a good thing. I'm so glad that it exists and that you're doing this.
Yeah. Luther said to me the first time I shook his hand, he was like, we have to do a print fair. The EAB void is a thing, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, of course it is. I totally agree. But, it's funny. COVID time is so elastic. I just looked on the Lower East Side website to see if they had archives about the EAB fair, and it ran until the pandemic, and even into it, there were 2 online versions in 2020 and in 2021. And in my mind, it stopped in like 2016 or
Oh,
something.
wow. Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
that's
what?
right. That's
Yeah.
right. The last in-person one was actually, I was there. It was 2019. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was the end of October 2019. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
like West 26th, like really West 26th Street.
Right.
That was the
Right.
last in-person one. And
Yeah.
Cedar Lake, I think that's what that building was.
That's right. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel, we always talk about the void. I'm like, wait, the void isn't actually that long, but it was long enough for people like you to join the IFPDA because I really want you to come to my fair.
Yeah. Well, I would love to come back to Baltimore.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yes.
I love Baltimore.
Yeah, we're the Baltimore Fair is we're on the calendar here in October, and we're gonna start, giving people time to think about whether or not they can do it. So
Yeah.
look
Yeah.
for an email near you.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, but that you say that though, it's 2025, so it actually had been 6 years since the last in-person EAB. The online ones are sort of, they're different, but
Yeah.
So 6
No,
years.
6 years is a gap. You're right.
It's a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. The curators too. Like we were all like, this is it. I can only go to this and, satellite, which is, it was great to have 2, but 3 was better.
Yeah. 3 was great. I know.
Yeah. Did you hear that Prince Gone Wild is reviving itself?
No.
Did you? I never went out to it. So Martin Mazura started Prince Gone Wild. It was the one night party thing, and however many vendors he could muster.
Yeah.
And then he stopped doing it, and now Justin Sands, who is part of the team at Blackburn, is reviving it. And so they've got all these metal bands playing and all these.
Oh, that's great! Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
All right, Mae. Well, thank you. I so appreciate you coming on, and it was great talking to you.
Yes, likewise. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Platemark with Mae Shore. I hope you enjoyed it. She's lovely, and I enjoy talking to her so much. Thank you, of course, to Mae for being a great guest. Thanks, Mae. And as usual, thank yous to my other support staff, to Dan Fury of Extension Audio for being my sound guy. Thanks, Dan. And to Uncle Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. And lastly, to Skip Barnhart and Lee Turner for their studio sounds that make up the soundscape at the beginning and end of each episode. Thank you, gentlemen. Images that Mae and I talked about are over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. You can also hit the support and donate button over there and help me keep the lights on. Otherwise, I think that is it. We'll see you next time.